Picture this. It's 1776 and America has just declared independence from Britain. Hooray! Now you and all the other delegates of the Continental Congress are looking at each other like, now what? The Articles of Confederation. That's what. I'm sorry, you're not an APUSH student and you don't know what the Articles of Confederation are? Well, that's why we're here. Today, I'm going to learn you all a thing about America's second best government system. Actually, how many government systems has this country had? First of all, let's set the scene. America has just declared independence from Britain, and Washington is out there giving the redcoats a roundhouse to the face. In the years leading up to the Declaration of Independence, the British Parliament had imposed a bunch of laws taxing the colonists because something about the 7 Years' War and them being broke because of it, I don't really know. I won't go into detail, but here's a list. This, along with the fact that the colonists had no representation in the British Parliament, went a long way to ensure that the colonists were properly pissed off. Now, keep in mind the fact that the British Parliament was a very strong central government that completely overruled the individual colonies, as it will explain some of the questionable decisions made while writing the Articles of Confederation. Alright, enough history. What the hell were the Articles of Confederation? Just like the Constitution we still use today, the Articles of Confederation outlined the system of government the U.S. was going to use. The Continental Congress adopted it in 1777, and after George Washington successfully gave the middle finger to the British and told them to piss off, all 13 states ratified it and began using it. Now, the actual structure of the government was quite different than what we have today. There was no president and no Supreme Court. There was only the legislature, which was unicameral. For all of you who speak English no good, that means there was only one chamber. The chamber was made up of a number of delegates from all 13 states. It's kind of like the Senate we have today, except that each state could send between 2 and 7 delegates. However, when it came to voting, each state only got one vote. Remember when I said the colonists did not like the strong central government of the British Parliament? Well, this was their response to that. They deliberately designed the central government of the U.S. to be weak, so it would never be able to overrule the states. There was no head of state or king at all because the founding fathers did not like living under the tyrant King George. Back then, the British monarchy actually had power and didn't spend their days complaining endlessly and doing whatever. Oh God. Oh God. The founders were so afraid of a strong central government that they basically did a complete 180 with the Articles. The states held so much power. When the Articles were ratified, the states were put into a league of friendship, where they were going to be binding themselves to assist each other so they could protect all their liberties and security. Yeah, no, none of that happened. Another thing, Congress did not have its own military, and yet only Congress could declare war. So Congress would be like, hey, we declare war. You guys, go fight. Oh, and any cost that we incur while fighting, you guys are going to have to pay for. Alright, thank you so much. And do you know why Congress was forced the states to pay for wars? Because Congress wasn't allowed to tax anybody. You see, Congress did not like all of King George's taxes on the colonists, so they decided their central government would not be allowed to tax anybody. This sounds like a great solution until you think about it for more than 10 seconds, since, everything requires money. But in my opinion, it's not what Congress can do that's causing most of the problem, it's what they can't do. As previously mentioned, Congress cannot levy taxes, so they can't pay for anything. In addition, they basically had no control over the economy. On paper, they had some control over it, but very little enforcement power, which meant they had no power over the states at all, which would lead to the downfall of the Articles of Confederation. Congress had basically no power over the states, which meant that any policy they created could just be ignored by the states. There was high inflation, and the states were fighting with each other over territorial and trade disputes, which threatened to destroy the whole nation. At this point, James Madison and George Washington were some of the people that came to the conclusion that maybe, just potentially, this whole Articles of Confederation thing may have potentially, possibly not been the best idea. All of these problems came to a head with an event called Shays' Rebellion. Listen, Shays' Rebellion is quite complicated, and someone could probably get a PhD just studying it, but here's a quick rundown. In Massachusetts in 1786 to 1787, there was a full-blown uprising from farmers who had fought in the Revolutionary War. They had been given very little compensation for fighting the war and were in heavy debt to businesses who had loaned them goods on credit. Those businesses were now demanding immediate payment. Man, businesses back in the 1700s were dicks. I'm glad to live in a time where companies have empathy for individuals and act in moral and ethical ways. But it gets worse. The Massachusetts government had levied high taxes, even higher than under the British, so the governor could pay off his business associates. The farmers, who could not pay, started getting arrested and had their properties foreclosed. This was all too much for them. They started to organize in August and called for reform. Daniel Shays, yes, it's that Shays, led a group of men to shut down a court. The state could have really used the military to put down the rebellion, except remember how Congress wasn't allowed to have a military? Only the states were allowed to have them, and no state came to Massachusetts' aid. After some fighting broke out, the rebellion was put down with some easing of taxes and debt for the farmers to help with their problems. Perhaps the biggest impact of Shays' rebellion is that the Articles of Confederation were finally going to be looked at. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention was called. 55 delegates convened in Philadelphia, a place known for its rich history and culture.
Show you this video right now because the crowds were just massive. Thousands and thousands of people were out here. But you know, there's another piece of video, and that shows all of the chaos that was happening in.
These delegates had one job: fix the Articles of Confederation, and the first thing they did was give up. You see, the Articles required a unanimous vote from the 13 states to change anything about them. It doesn't take a genius to figure out why this might be an issue, so the delegates just threw out the Articles of Confederation and took everything they learned and made the Constitution we know and love. My government teacher always said that everything you see in the 7 unamended Articles and the Bill of Rights are solutions that can be traced back to problems found under the British, or the Articles of Confederation. She also described the Articles as being a full 180 from the British, and the Constitution as being more like a 90 degrees from them. They started here, had problems, moved all the way over here, had more problems, and finished off here. An argument can be made that the careful planning of the Constitution is the biggest reason as to why the US is still around today, but that's a video for another time. I'm just glad that everyone respects the Constitution and would never leverage their power and influence to undermine its authority and protections.